Good morning to everyone. I hope you're starting the week on a good footing, or you started it yesterday. We finished, of course, as you know, Kant last time from the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, and with that we covered the notion of freedom, so Sartre and Kant. And now we move on, as I said. We're not going to do Plato, we're going to move on to Aristotle and Nichomachean ethics. So we are ahead, as you can see, because we were supposed to have a midterm this week, of course, last week, and of course we didn't. So we are ahead, there's no worries, we have all our time to work through Aristotle's text. We spoke, of course, about Aristotle in the past. We spoke about Book 1, especially touched slightly on Book 2, so we're going to go into details now in Book 2. A few reminders that why this is a book on ethics and not called a book on morals. We said that ethics are a question of living together, of ethos, which means ethos, it's habit, so it's how we habitually do things, how we live every day with other people, and so on, as opposed, and ethics is a question of telos. We said that also at the beginning of our course. Telos in Greek means al-hadaf, the goal, the target. So in ethics we have a common goal, something we reach, and so this differentiates ethics a little bit from morals. In morals are more deontological. Morals are more a question of obligation, what you must and must not do. This is why in the Abrahamic religions you find morals. We speak more of morals because you have things that you must do and must not do, things that are an obligation to do and things that are forbidden to do. Okay, of course here we are then with Aristotle. So we have, of course, morals. We have things that you have to decide inside, but it's not yet the main thing in considering our relationship with others. We are still then at the ethical level before the notion of an interior world, which we find in St. Augustine. Anyways, if you see, we have here in Book 2 moral virtue. Book 2, moral virtue. So moral, take it with a grain of salt. It's not exactly as it becomes when Christianity comes along or when we follow the Jewish law or the Islamic law. It's not as deontological yet. So moral virtue. We also have to ask then about virtue. Virtue is a kind of excellence, and we will see hexis in Greek, and arete is the excellence. We will see how all this works out. Let's read together. We will be reading mostly everything, but I will also be skipping, as you will see. Moral virtue, like the arts, is acquired by repetition of the corresponding acts. So this is one of the main things in ethics. As I said, ethics is a question of habit, so we know it's a question of repetition. So moral virtue is not something that is just there. It's something that you have to acquire, so you are not born with it. Let's be clear. You are not born a good person, in other words. So you have to acquire moral virtue. How do you do it? By a certain kind of repetition. We will have then after to see what kind of repetition and of the corresponding acts. So the acts, of course, that correspond to moral virtue. Let's read. Virtue then, being of two kinds, intellectual and moral. Intellectual virtue in the main, so intellectual excellence, we can say, virtue in the main owes both its birth and its growth to teaching, right? Of course, if you want to be an excellent physicist, you have to study physics very well. So I continue, then intellectual virtue in the main owes both its birth and its growth to teaching. Someone has to teach you, for which reason it requires experience, of course, and time. While moral virtue comes about as a result of habit, whence also its name, ethike, which in Greek, as I told you, is habit. Whence also its name is one that is formed by slight variation from the word ethos, habit. From this, it is also plain that none of the moral virtues arises in us by nature. For nothing that exists by nature can form a habit contrary to its nature. For instance, the stone, which by nature moves downwards, cannot be habituated to move upwards, not even if one tries to train it by throwing it up 10,000 times. Nor can fire be habituated to move downwards, nor can anything else that by nature behaves in one way be trained to behave in another. Neither by nature, then, nor contrary to nature, do the virtues arise in us. Rather, we are adapted by nature to receive them, and are made perfect by habit. Okay. So, if you are to underline anything here, please underline the last sentence. So, neither by nature, then, nor contrary to nature do the virtues arise in us. Rather, we are adapted by nature to receive them, and we are made perfect by habit. Okay, so we are not naturally then moral beings, if you like. We are not naturally ethical beings. We are not naturally people who have virtues. So you are not born a generous man, for example. Okay, you are not born a man with regards to others. You are not born like this. But we are not also going to do something contrary to nature when we acquire virtues. Okay? So what is it then? The virtue is something potential in us. This is why Aristotle says we are adapted by nature to receive them. So potentially we can become virtuous. So not every creature, can become virtuous. Only humans here, right? Because humans are adapted to become by nature virtuous. Okay, so we have the potentiality to receive them. We have the possibility to receive them, right? Like a computer that has a USB port. It has a USB port, so it has the possibility to receive USB key. If it doesn't have it, if it's not a computer, you can do whatever you want with your USB key. It's not going to get in there. Okay? So, you are not naturally born virtuous, but you are adapted by nature to become virtuous. Okay, we continue. Again, of all the things that come to us by nature, we first acquire the potentiality and later exhibit the activity. Okay? In potentia, in action. These are the two pairs to really know. You are potentially, for example, a doctor, but until you learn and start exercising as a doctor, you are not yet in actu, in activity, a doctor. So first you have the potentiality, then the actuality. So again, for all the things that come to us by nature, we first acquire the potentiality, and later, of course, we exhibit the activity. Okay. I jump the brackets here, no need to read them. But the virtues we get by first exercising them, as also happens in the case of the arts as well. For the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Exempli gratia, for example, men become builders by building, and lyre players by playing the lyre. You don't become suddenly a guitar player. You have to play the guitar to become a guitar player. So too, we become just, and virtuous, and so on, by doing just acts. Temperate, by doing temperate acts. It means control over your vegetative side. And brave, by doing brave acts. So, the question then of virtues is we acquire them by acting virtuously. Okay? This is another dimension. We have to be in activity. Okay? So, by exercising them, by practicing them, we acquire the virtues. I jump the next paragraph, no need to read it. and I go to the last one. Again, it is from the same causes and by the same means that every virtue is both produced and destroyed, and similarly every art. For it is from playing the lyre, so from the cause, the lyre, that both good and bad lyre players are produced, right? So, and the corresponding statement is true of builders and all the rest. I jump 5 lines, jump with me. By doing the acts that we do in our transactions with other men, we become just or unjust. I jump 3 lines. The same is true of appetites and feelings of anger. Some men become temperate and good-tempered, others self-indulgent and irascible. It means they get angry quickly, by behaving in one way or the other in the appropriate circumstances. Thus, in one word, states of character arise out of like activities. This is why the activities we exhibit must be of a certain kind. It is because the states of character correspond to the differences between these activities. It makes no small difference then whether we form habits of one kind or of another from our very youth. It makes a very great difference, or rather all the difference. Okay, so what do we retain from here? Again, it is by acting virtuously that we are going to acquire a character that is virtuous. Okay, and since this is a question of practice, since this is a question of exercise, Aristotle is telling us you have to start young. Okay, from a very young age, you have to become virtuous by doing virtuous acts, by acting virtuously, right? So in the acts themselves, either you do a good act or a bad act, you have to act, and then you become virtuous or non-virtuous. So from our very youth, we have to be trained, we have to be exercised, so it becomes a habit for us in becoming virtuous. Okay. There is something here that I will have to just mention in the next section. We don't have to read the whole section. I'm following the page numbers of the actual manuscript, so they are on top, on the left, top left, you will see them. We are on page 24, for example, now. If you look at the next heading, it says, these acts cannot be prescribed exactly, but must avoid excess and defect. Okay, so in the act of generosity, whatever, in the virtuous act, that's going to be called virtuous, you don't do excess and you don't do too little, not too much, too little. We will go back to this a lot more as we read on. But I want you to note certain things here. If I go to page 25, page 25, just underline this, line 3. Consider what is appropriate to the occasion. Okay? As happens also in the art of medicine or of navigation. This is something important. In the question of virtue and doing virtuous acts, Aristotle is telling us, be careful, be always observant of what is appropriate to the occasion. There is, in Greek, 3 words that signify time. We have the word chronos, which gives us chronometer and chronology and all this. Chronos is the linear time, right? It's just a simple mathematical time, if you like, or time of physics, of Newtonian physics. You go from 1 minute, 10 minutes, etc. This is just linear time, okay? Chronos. Another type is ion. Ion, you don't have to know all this very well, but ion is basically outside time. It's eternal time. It's the time of the gods. And of course in Christianity, Islam and Judaism, it's God as eternal, right? God lives outside our chronos, our linear time. He's eternal. So eternity. And there is a third word used for time called kairos. It's written, memorize it here because it's the time important in the Nichomachean ethics. Okay, the time in Aristotle's ethics is this. Kairos, very important. It's written Kairos. Okay, kairos. Kairos means the appropriate time. For we live in this a lot, right? For example, the appropriate time for fasting is Ramadan, okay, or it's Lent in the Christian doctrine. So this is the appropriate time to fast. It's when things must be done, right? So this is what he means here also by the occasion. It's the appropriate time to do something. So I don't need to be generous all the time to everyone, right? There's an appropriate time. If you come to me and you are rich, I'm not going to show the generosity. If you come to me and at a particular time your car got destroyed, your sheep were killed, and you are going to be in very deep trouble, and I help you, this is the right time, the kairos, the right occasion to help you, okay, to show generosity. So please note the importance then in Aristotle of the notion of kairos, of the right time to do something, of the occasion. Okay? And I note something very quickly here because we'll get back to it. After this then, as I read, consider what is appropriate to the occasion, as happens also in medicine. It's a good example, and navigation on a ship. I continue, but though our present account is of this nature, we must give what help we can. First then let us consider this, that it is the nature of such things to be destroyed by defect and excess. Okay? As we see in the case of strength and of health. So the nature of these things, let's even say of virtue, is to be destroyed by defect and excess. We will come back to it. And notice the end of the paragraph, it says, and preserved by the mean. These things are destroyed by excess and defect, like courage, and preserved by the mean. Note this, and later we'll get back to it. The next paragraph tells us, but not only are the sources and causes of their origination and growth the same as those of their destruction, but also the sphere of their actualization will be the same, for this is also true of the things which are most evident to sense, example of strength. It is produced by taking much food and undergoing much exertion, and it is the strong man that will be most able to do these things. So, no need to know any of this, just now you can underline. So too is it with the virtues. By stopping, by abstaining from pleasures, we become temperate. Not drinking too much, not eating too much, etc. And it is when we have become so that we are most able to abstain from them. When we become temperate, when we become in control of our bodies and our urges, then we stop too much pleasure. And similarly too in the case of courage. Now, please learn this, underline here, mostly. Again, underline very well, 2 lines maybe. For, by being habituated to despise things that are fearful, and to stand our ground against them, we become brave. And it is when we have become so that we shall be most able to stand our ground against them. Okay? So, there is learning, there is education. We must become habituated, we must get used to hating things, despise things that are fearful. Not despise is better. It means consider them as worthless, bad things, right? Are fearful. That the things that are fearful. So notice again, we have to learn, we have to acquire habits, sorry for repeating. To despise things that are fearful, that we become brave, and so on. So it's a question of habit, how we get our virtue. And notice, I jump now to the next, not a jump, I go to the next heading. Pleasure in doing virtuous acts. So notice pleasure is there. Pleasure in doing virtuous acts is a sign that the virtuous disposition, yani habit, hexis in Greek, has been acquired. a variety of considerations show the essential connection of moral virtue with pleasure and pain. So, very important paragraph here, perhaps one of the most important ones. Go to page 26, line 4. For moral virtue is concerned with pleasures and pains. It is on account of the pleasure that we do bad things, and on account of the pain that we abstain from noble ones. Hence, we ought to have been brought up in a particular way from our very youth, as Plato says, so as both to delight in and to be pained by the things that we ought to be delighted in and pained by. This is the right education. I read again, I continue. Again, if the virtues are concerned with actions and passions, and every passion, every action is accompanied by pleasure and pain, for this reason also, virtue will be concerned with pleasures and pain. This is indicated also by the fact that punishment is inflicted by these means, for it is a kind of cure. Anyways, I read the next paragraph. Again, as we said, but lately every state of soul has a nature relative to and concerned with the kind of things by which it tends to be made worse or better, but it is by reason of pleasures and pains that men become bad, by pursuing and avoiding these, either the pleasures and pains they ought not, or when they ought not, or as they ought not, or by doing wrong in one of the other similar ways that may be distinguished. Ought and ought not. Should and should not, right? When you're supposed to do and supposed not to. Supposed to feel, supposed not to feel. This is key here. This is why virtue is a question of education. What is Aristotle saying? He's saying you have to educate yourself to feel pleasure at doing the right act, at doing the just act, at doing the virtuous act. And show, of course, pain at seeing the bad act, something not virtuous. Evil, for example. Let me take an example. When we were, I gave you this before, when we were kids, we had, if you are like me, I was in Collège des Frères, مدرسة الفرير. كنا نخبط ببعض, right? We used to fight, we used to hate each other, let's be honest. And of course, if you have one of your comrades whom you don't like, and you see him getting beaten by another person, I don't know about you, it used to make me happy, right? I see him getting beaten, and I was very happy because I don't like this guy. Okay, so I felt pleasure. It gave me pleasure to see him beaten. This is, of course, an unjust act. It is unjust to beat a person who didn't do anything to me necessarily at that moment. It is unjust to feel pleasure at seeing a person beaten. So, a virtuous education says, a moral education, an ethical, let's say, education says, we have to learn not to feel pleasure at someone being hit, but to feel pain. Okay? And the opposite is true. I see someone getting a lot more than I, or someone getting things that are nice to him at the time, and I don't like this guy, so of course it gives me pain. If I have a virtuous education, I should not get pain from this, I should get pleasure. I think of other things. We used to kill birds for no reason, and even, I tell you a secret, we used to sit on the balcony with my cousin, and we used to take a habbi, if you remember, BB gun, and we used from the balcony to shoot at the stray cats, and even sometimes at people, and we would laugh. Okay, this gave us pleasure. Of course, shooting and hurting totally innocent people and innocent cats, mostly cats, okay, is something that is not virtuous. So I should feel pain at this. And indeed, I had a certain good education. In part, it's not perfect. But today, I will never take a BB gun and shoot at cats or whoever is walking and get pleasure from it. I would get pain if I saw someone get this, okay? So this makes it clear what Aristotle is saying. We have to educate people. We have to give them through repetition the habit, so this is up to the parents, to the school, etc., of feeling pleasure when they ought to feel pleasure, on the occasion, at the right time, and to feel pain when they ought to feel pain, at the right time, the right occasion, and not to feel pleasure when they ought not to feel pleasure, and not to feel pain when they ought not to feel pain on the right occasion, and so on. So we see we developed slowly, and we are learning how now to acquire then moral virtues. We can now jump. I let you read the rest here. It's important, of course, but if you understood what I said, it should be sufficient. I think no need here to look at all the objections raised against the acquisition of virtues through virtuous acts. Right, you can see the heading is an objection to the view that one acquires virtues by doing virtuous acts, and in reply, the conditions needed to possess virtue and act from it. What I want you to just note here are the conditions. Go then, page 27, to the last 3 lines, and there are 3 conditions that you just need to know about virtuous acts and their acquisition. The agent, if you see last 3 lines, the agent also must be in a certain condition when he does those acts. In the first place, he must have knowledge, this is one. Secondly, he must choose, so we must know the acts and then choose them, the acts that are done in accordance with virtue. Right? He must have knowledge. Secondly, he must choose the acts and choose them for their own sakes, not for the sake of something else. And thirdly, his action must proceed from a firm and unchangeable character. Okay, so we have to know our acts and when they correspond and are in accordance with virtue or not, and of course then when we should feel pleasure, ought to feel pleasure or not, we should know those. Secondly, then we must choose them. I must choose to do an act that is in accordance with virtue, and do it for its own sake, not for something else. So I help you if I'm generous, not because I'm thinking in the future you're going to help me. No, I do it because the act itself is generous. So I don't have anything behind this. I don't have any other interest, right? مش مصلحجي يعني. مش عم ساعدك لأنه أنا مفكر أنت عندك أشياء أنا بحاجة إلها وحتساعدني. إذا هلا أعطيتك مصاري بدك تساعدني دخل ابني على المدرسة لأن تعرف المدير. No, right? Just to give you the example. So you must choose the act and choose it for its own sake, not because you want something else, not because you have something in the back of your mind. So you must have knowledge of what acts are in accordance with virtue, choose these acts for their own sake, and then this should come, if you are a virtuous person, from a character. It means a firm and unchangeable character. It means you are a person who by habit and repetition acquired through education this strong character. This is what you are. This is who you are. Okay? All right. We are done with this heading. We are now to go to the definition of moral virtue. What I will do is leave this till next time, because I think by next time we can do all of them. If not, we'll do the definition and then move to the characteristics of the extreme and mean states. But I think on Thursday we'll be able to do them. So we stop here for today. You'll be happy you have no homework, and just make sure you know very well what I just explained to you, and we'll continue on Thursday. Good luck, stay safe, stay home.